We cannot all be Soren, Farja or Dorothea, who are some of the most popular characters in Fire Emblem, despite just being units and not lords or main characters even. On the other side of the coin are some of the series' most forgettable faces. The victims of these games having 40, 50 or sometimes 60 playable characters, of which 95% is optional to use. Today I want to shine a light on these characters and pick the most forgettable unit of every game. Do keep in mind that I'm not including any characters that had to be downloaded or were added to the game long after launch. Only characters that were available for your first playthrough on day 1 qualify, just to keep things fair and a bit more fun. With that said, let's get started, which we of course do in Archanea. I've decided to combine Shadow Dragon and Mystery of the Emblem into one entry, because a ton of characters overlap between the two games, and unlike the Radiant titles later, these games really blend together in terms of characterizations. That said, these titles have so many forgettable characters, you could honestly fill an entire video with them. I feel like legit 80% of these games' rosters barely make any impact whatsoever, and with the lack in supports, it's easy to see why. That is, if you even know how to recruit these guys, because some of them are very easy to miss. So yeah, even the 10th most forgettable character in Archanea is way more forgettable than the number 1 from games coming later in this video. But I have to pick one, and it really wasn't easy. Names like Rad, Roger, Frost, Caesar and Dolph are very suitable candidates, and then you also have Lawrence and Tomas, who are so forgettable free houses reuse their names, despite them not exactly being the most common in the world. But in the end, my pick was Warren. He is exclusive to Mystery of the Emblem, adding to his niche status, and although he does appear early in Book 2 and is one of the only 2 hunters in this part of the game, his only competition is far superior. Caster joins the army only 2 chapters after Warren and is so much better it's not even funny. In the remakes things are a lot closer, but Warren is still an incredibly forgettable unit with no personality whatsoever. At least Caster has a prior connection to Sheeta, Warren has nothing. So yeah, he's my pick for the Archanea titles, but there were so many candidates I fully understand if you pick another. On to Gaiden, or Shadows of Valentia, as I expect most of you have played it, which fortunately is a very easy one. This game has an extremely tight-knit group of characters, with barely any room for benching. As such, every unit you have has a presence within your army and will at least make some form of impact. Well, all but a few. First, there is the choice between Dean and Sonya. Now, Sonya is a much more interesting character, so she's definitely off the hook. And while I'm willing to bet most people only saw Dean as an enemy, that at least still makes him a little memorable, and those that recruited him I think will remember him. Or at least, remember him more than most people do Noma. Not only is Noma not a good unit, he's also very easy to miss, to the point where I don't think many people would have recruited him without prior knowledge. While he is slightly more story relevant than Dean, his lackluster availability as a secret late game unit has to make Noma my pick. Next up is Genealogy of the Holy War, which is kinda easy and kinda difficult at the same time. On one hand, it's glaringly obvious what type of character is the most forgettable, and it's easily the substitute characters. These appear in the 2nd generation of the game, and only if some of your female units either fell in battle or ended up unpaired. Since that is something you have to almost go out of your way to make happen, very few players will have ever used these characters. But we still have to narrow things down, because there are a total of 14 substitute characters, all on more or less equal ground. So now I had to really dive into the details. For example, Charlotte is notorious for being able to obtain Berserk, while Amid is the only playable male fighter in the game. Others have special conversations in certain scenarios, which is not super unique, but at least helps push one unit in particular towards the absolute bottom of the barrel. And that is Daisy. Not only does she have nothing special about her whatsoever, she is also one of the worst units in the game. So even if you end up with her on your roster by pure coincidence, you're also pretty likely to just bench her outright. And so, Daisy is the most forgettable character in Genealogy of the Holy War, and honestly, a very good candidate for the title of most forgettable in the series, period. On to Phrasia, which, similar to the Archanea games, is filled with characters that are easy to miss and forget, mostly due to the complete lack of impact some of these characters make. There are too many units in this game whose only dialogue is their recruitment lines, making them perfect candidates for this list. However, as forgettable as say Ralph is, my pick ended up being Trode. Because not only is Trode another silent type, he's also recruited in a paralogue or guidance chapter. And as if that wasn't bad enough, he's not only the only character to join in that paralogue, he's one of 4 and can only be recruited by already having obtained Pern earlier in this same paralogue. So yeah, Trode is very missable and even if recruited, easy to slip your mind. Onto the Binding Blade, where things begin getting more difficult. From now on, rosters become a bit more trimmed, designs improve, and the rise of supports help make everyone much more memorable. But there is always someone the most forgettable. My first idea was Ellen, your early healer, who is a nothing burger of a character and completely outclassed by characters who join only a little later, like Saul or Clarine. However, since she's a part of your early team, you at least end up using her even if only for a little bit. The same cannot be said, however, for Garrett. He joins much later in the game, when your army already has its foundation built. Of course, you can always make room for a new unit here and there, but Garrett's problem is that he joins in the same chapter as the way better, cooler and memorable Igreen, Faye and possibly Percival. Meanwhile, Garrett is just a fairly standard axe user, another bandit without an interesting story to him that must be pursued in order to be recruited, unlike Igreen or Faye. And as a cherry on top, he's also not a good unit. Of course, Blazing Blade is a similar game to Binding Blade, meaning it's about equally difficult to pick a most forgettable character here. Interestingly enough though, I think from the outside looking in, there are 2 very obvious picks, who have actually become everything but forgotten since. Carla joins under extreme specific circumstances during the shopping chapter right near the end of the game, making her a prime candidate for this video. However, she has a grand total of 3 alts available in Fire Emblem Heroes, which is the same amount as Dorothea, mind you. Another candidate is Renault, who can be recruited even later than Carla during the penultimate chapter. But if you dive into his supports and past, which to be fair, you don't have much time to do in game, he is actually an extremely memorable character, so I decided to focus on someone else instead, Geitz. He can only be obtained if you play the Linus version of the 4-Fanged Offensive, which requires your 3 lords to be above level 50 together, which means some serious investment into Lyn, Eliwood and Hector. To make matters even worse, his counterpart Wallace is way more memorable than him, being a lot of players' first promoted unit. Furthermore, Geitz can only be recruited by Dart, who is himself hardly a must-have on your team. At least Geitz himself is quite good, otherwise he'd be easily the most forgettable unit of the whole worldwide Fire Emblem era. We continue with Sacred Stones, which was honestly the most difficult one yet. This small cast of characters is really memorable, it turns out, meaning my eventual pick is one of only 2 in this entire video who is featured in Fire Emblem Heroes. And that character is Natasha. She's another early game healer, but unlike Ellen from Binding Blade, who ended up outclassed later, Natasha is your second healer, which is a problem if you're not really much better than the one players have already bonded with at least a little. Mulder is not exactly set for Tana. In fact, he is also one of Natasha's fiercest competition when it comes to forgettableness, but in the end, I decided to weigh the situation in Sacred Stones over Heroes. Especially since Natasha is just fodder in that game. It's not like she made any impact there either. Moving on to Tellius, we are separating the 2 games this time around, starting with Path of Radiance of course. And honestly, easiest one yet. Only 1 character in this game does not return for Radiant Dawn, and while that is I guess noteworthy in its own right, it's not like he makes such an impact in Path of Radiance to begin with. I'm talking about Largo, who is also a late game unit to make matters even worse. Character-wise, he's also nothing special. His personality is one we've seen countless times in the games already. And since he spends the majority of Radiant Dawn turned to stone, he doesn't leave an unforgettable impression on the Wii either. And since he's not playable in that game, we need another pick there. And frankly, there are a lot of candidates, since most original characters from Radiant Dawn aren't exactly the most memorable ones. That said, my eventual pick did appear briefly in Path of Radiance, being Neil Lucci. When he originally joins during Chapter 2, he makes a pretty good first impression, and is honestly pretty strong. But then Har and Alincia join, and he starts falling down the ranks. And by the time he returns during Part 4, Nealachi is washed beyond belief. Add to that his design and character of an elderly man is a one-way ticket to the Forgotten Land, and I doubt many people will remember this guy. We continue to Fire Emblem Awakening, where the series of course exploded in popularity. This means that the characters left to come are not even close to being as forgotten as legends like Warren or Daisy, but there is still a huge gap between the characters left to come and say the lords of these games. For Awakening, we have to look immediately at the child units. After all, they're all missable, and I think in most cases, players will prefer their parents, with whom they have a bond already. Out of all the Awakening kids, I'd say the two most forgettable ones are Laurent and Kiel. Their mothers, Miriel and Sully, are already not the most iconic characters of the game, but their kids are even further down the list. That said, picking between these two is nearly impossible. I mean, they were even added to Heroes at the exact same time, very late by the way, so that's no decider either. In the end though, I think Kiel's personality is a tad more basic and generic, and thus forgettable, so she gets to hold the questionable title on her own. Then we get to Fates, where we must once again look at the child units for the same reasons. Considering the concept felt a lot more tacked on in Fates compared to how integral it was in Awakening, I'd say these kids are even more forgotten than their earlier counterparts. One sticks out as especially forgettable though, being Ignatius, the son of Benny. Similar to Sully and Miriel, Benny is already not exactly the most memorable character in Fates, meaning it wouldn't be surprising if plenty of players didn't even bother pairing him up. And even if they did, Ignatius is not exactly blowing anyone's mind anytime soon. His character is a classic, tough guy with timid personality, exactly like his father, and that this wasn't appreciated by audiences is made all the more clear by Heroes. Not only is he not in the game, which says enough for a Fates character, he has performed the worst out of any in Fates in Choose Your Legends ballots during several years. So either he's very unpopular, or no one remembers he even exists. Three Houses is next, and this is probably one of the hardest yet. Not only is this cast relatively small, it's also divided over 3 houses, meaning almost every unit in this game is remembered by those loyal to their house. And even the church staff are well remembered, especially since they can join multiple routes quite easily. There is however one character that sticks out like a sore thumb among all these: Gilbert. He may be Annette's father, which makes him seriously notable. He's also exclusive to Azure Moon. And in a game with so many iconic characters who are available in most routes, Gilbert ends up at the bottom of the barrel. That said, Gilbert is probably still the most relevant character in this video, even if he's Three Houses' most forgettable one. And just like with Ignatius, if a character from this game isn't in Heroes, that says enough. And last but not least, we arrive at Engage. Since this is of course the newest game in the series, I would assume it's still fresh enough in your memory to not have forgotten these characters yet, even if most of them aren't really all that story relevant. At least they all have memorable designs, a good amount of supports and voice acting, which definitely helps. And so, I think the most forgettable character in this game isn't yet forgotten, but the writing is on the wall in capital letters. Saphir and Linden have "forgotten in 10 years" written all over them, with Linden definitely edging it out over Saphir due to being an optional enemy recruitment, meaning he's even missable on top of being unremarkable. One of the easiest in this entire video, I would say. The gap in notoriety between these two and, well, everyone else is absolutely massive. And that's about it for today. How many of these characters did you even remember exist? And which ones do you consider to be wildly forgettable? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel to stay updated on all my future Fire Emblem content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.